I've never been close to the top of anything.
I mean, close to the top. Look at this. Tom Johnston's actual match-worn Wakefield shirt. I don't know how many games he played last year, but he's got loads of tries this year for Catalans. Let's not get off to a depressing start because that's to come. Because let's talk about. I mean, I can't believe it's not on the front page of it was on the front page of the Daily Mirror. Kevin Sinfield, you were there. Sir Kevin, Lord Kevin Sinfield, his old mate Rob Burrow, his old mucker Rob. There he is, pushing him around the streets of Leeds, and carries him across the finish line at the end of the marathon. I mean,
I think
we've said everything that needs to be said about Kevin Sinfield, but then he does something else again, and you.
The last 48 hours have summed up rugby league. That we have our moment in the sun with James Roby breaking a record of appearances for St Helens, with Kevin Sinfield and Rob Burrow epitomising what we do best, but what is beyond the realms of sport. And then just as we're basking in that glory, we get the announcement about the World Cup's not going to be in France. But I think we should take the positives first. And I've not seen anyone as selfless as Kevin Sinfield. He played that way, but the last 2 years have been taking it to another level. The atmosphere yesterday, again, transcended sport, but was so rugby league. No other marathons begin and end within a stadium. The fact that the course was set up so that when you ran in, you were coming across the pitch facing the North Stand, which is full of friends and relatives, and everyone that we saw afterwards was ridiculously emotional, which was partly because they were absolutely knackered, because it's a brutal course. But to have 12,000 people in that environment of a ground, and then to be relaying the pictures of what Kevin did, and I don't know how far in advance that had been planned that he was going to carry Rob over the line, but I think you were pointing out earlier today that those pictures went worldwide. You know, that there isn't a media outlet in Australia, New Zealand, America, Spain, wherever, that hasn't carried that image, and people talk radio phone-ins this morning about what it means as a gesture of friendship. It's just transcends the sport, but it's the best of what we do. And I think, again, little things like having the current Leeds team handing out medals to people as they came in, having players fly in from Australia to be part of, Luke Burgess and Nick Youngquest flying in from the other side of the world, Matt Adamson, just because it was their teammates. It just epitomised the best of us. There's so many tears. But it was wonderful, and yeah, I think the fact that the national news carried it as a story rather than necessarily a sporting event, I don't think you can heap too much praise on him, and everybody buy his autobiography, which is out in 2 weeks.
Where should they buy it from, Phil?
Well, independent retail bookshops, I think, are a good place to buy it.
I wondered why all those books were downstairs.
You had to climb over.
I wish I was there when I saw some of the images. I wish I was not doing it necessarily. I have huge respect.
But you
for
could
people.
have done it.
Well, the furthest I've ever run in a single distance, I think, is 8k. Typically in a game you might be doing 10 or 11, but that's over across 80 minutes, which is fairly straightforward. But no, I don't have any appetite to do either a half or a full marathon, to be honest. And I have respect for anybody that did it. But I know a few people that did do it, and the conditions probably weren't the best yesterday. They were probably a bit too warm, weren't they?
Temperature was much higher than expected.
Yeah.
And all the training had been done from the winter in cold weather. It was a brutal
And I looked at the route when people were uploading their Stravas, because I didn't know whereabouts it was, but we had sort of a steady climb out of Headingley all the way up to Otley Shevin, then down into Otley and along the river, but then you've got to climb back up Poole Bank, I guess, or somewhere along Poole Bank. I can't imagine that was an easy course, but it just looked tremendously positive, didn't it? Everybody that was involved, and like you say, that the fact that they picked it up as a news story, not a sports story, it was great.
We have to give a shout out to Joe. Joe did the marathon, and exhausted though he was, could barely get onto the little village area where people were getting food and drink afterwards. Was on his knees, but came over to say he was a watcher of the show. I said I'd give him a shout out, because anybody who did that marathon deserves it.
Absolutely. Hi, Joe.
I imagine that, I know the magazine's only just out. Here it is in front of it. I don't know why I'm pointing. It's on the screen in the corner. I need to pick one up. I imagine it's going to be very hard in the next few weeks for that not to be the image on the front of the magazine. Something quite extraordinary is going to have to happen.
I think, as we've said, the fact that it was all played down. It's one of the images that you could not see without wanting to burst into tears, particularly if you know the relationship between the two. But then you get to the point where Kevin's almost making it self-deprecating in a way, saying, the only reason I carried him over the line because I didn't want him to finish before me. It's like, that's what it's all about. That's
it's a sign of the bloke, isn't it? It was the ultimate professional on the field, wasn't he?
Did he cause you a moment of trouble?
No, not really. He was one of those players that was difficult in a way because he would challenge in a more intelligent way. So, yes, potentially was a little bit more challenging in that regard, but, I can't really recall any dissent. He probably left that to Danny Maguire.
He had others.
Yeah, that would do it for him. Yeah, but just the ultimate professional, and I think that's the story that's got people engaged from outside the world of rugby league, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the friendship and the teamship, as you say, people flying from the other side of the world to do it, just tremendous.
We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that they were saying that the combined total of money raised for all the charities that were run for was £3 million, of which about a third of that is MND related. Yeah. And again, those are sort of figures that up until 2 years ago were unheard of in that particular medical sphere. So I think we're a step nearer to the Rockborough MND Centre being built, which is again a great reason behind all of this.
And I think didn't Rob's family go and visit Rishi Sunak a few months ago to discuss the
50 million quid that was promised.
Yeah,
they need to go and visit the French Rugby League. I think the other thing we should mention as well is that Lindsay, his wife, completed her first ever marathon, and when asked why she was doing it, said she felt she needed to contribute something. It's like, no, just about everything.
Bring some cakes or something.
Everything you do is contributing something, but she completed the marathon as well.
Yeah, so tremendous. Yeah. And from the city's perspective, it's the first time they've done a marathon for 20 years.
Yeah.
And as you say, they started it and finished it in the stadium. I thought it made it as an event something a little bit different. The course is probably a little bit more challenging than other marathon courses. So from a city's perspective, it was a success.
We were speaking to people that had come up from Essex to run them. I mean, there were 5-hour drives back after you just done, but they wanted to be part of something, and they felt it was bigger than just a marathon. And the streets were lined, and coming back in, runners were saying there wasn't any part of the streets where we didn't get support and encouragement. And again, I think for the city that must have put millions into cafes and hotels and restaurants and bars, which is great.
Not just that, it gives the feel-good factor, doesn't it? The
it
weather was great,
like
people get
city.
out and be part of something that unites people. Sort of following on from the coronation, which may not unite everybody, but...
I was at the snooker. I was watching it backstage at the snooker. That was a weird afternoon.
And I think James Roby as well, whilst it's a completely different thing that we're celebrating.
But it's the same kind of leadership, on the field in a different way.
And I know that it's a record that is St Helens, but 532 games in the modern era is just ridiculous. It played in the position that he plays in, where he's getting battered every single week. And I think what we forget is he was Man of Steel in 2007, when he was an impact player coming off the bench. And to still be playing at such a high level 15 years later, it's
so
just astonishing.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, obviously, I don't know what the next person in the Super League record is for appearances. I could say, as everybody else has said, his level of consistent performance week in, week out is probably at worst a 7, and probably more like an 8 or a 9 most weeks. And the reality is, if he wanted to play again next year, he probably could physically. I don't suspect he will.
He says he's not going
go another year. But tremendous for the club and the sport as well. I think, and be interested to see what he does post playing. I would assume he's going to go into some sort of coaching role.
I'm not sure. I don't know if he's cut out for that. I don't think that's something that he particularly aspires to do. But I think the most important thing is that he got the right level of acclaim, that it was on Channel 4, which was great, so that, you know, they could make a lot of it to a national audience. That, again, there was the line of honour from both teams when he came out and when he went back. There's interviews with him, you know, that normally a rugby league player wouldn't get if it hadn't had that profile attached to it. And again, like Kevin, you say there are similarities. It's the modesty that comes over. It's always about, it's the team. But no, I think in an unprecedented era of success for those two particular clubs, where those guys have been the figurehead of both of them, it was just a wonderful weekend to celebrate the best of what we are. In that respect, I'm pleased St Helens got a win for him as well, because it would have slightly tainted it, because that would mean more to him than, you know, getting a glass vase or whatever it might have been. Which is no disrespect to Salford in any way whatsoever, but I think he deserved, you know, to go off the field as a winner as well as creating a landmark. And I think we were allowed to bask until this afternoon in the glory of all of that.
It's like these, you see these people around who claim to be inspirational gurus and stuff and all this kind of crap. You've probably got some of the books in your shop. I don't mean to not say that the books are crap, but then you've got people like Kevin Sinfield, James Roby, who would just...
I don't know if I mentioned it, but Kevin Sinfield's got
a book
in the next couple of weeks.
See, everyone now says the word legend is overused. The phrase "the word legend is overused" is overused, but the word inspirational is overused. But in this case, Paul Francis has been on. I believe he's already started coaching at Blackrock. So there you go.
Yeah, I don't think he'll want to coach at the professional level. I think he's seen how much commitment that is, and I think he just wants to enjoy his kids playing. And wouldn't it be amazing? I mean, there are already, you know, Jack Sinfield's playing, but you can imagine if another Roby's on the horizon as well. It'd be great.
Before we get on to the World Cup, because we just mentioned amateurs and kids and stuff, this, not epidemic, but there is at least 2 cases in the last few weeks of parents being in bother, causing bother at amateur games. When you were a younger referee, have you ever had any trouble like that as you're working your way through?
Yeah. There was one in particular. It was a game I did at Shawcross. I'd done back-to-back games, which a lot of our junior referees do, and it was the last time I did back-to-back games. And my dad wasn't keen on it because, particularly on a winter's day, which is when I was refereeing, it was winter rugby, and you know, by the time the second game came around, you were pretty cold and stuff. But so it was the second of 2 games that I'd done that morning, and the team, Rodley Rockets, I don't know if they exist still exist, but yeah, I was basically abused during the game by the spectators from Rodley.
Well, hopefully they don't exist.
And then all the way back to the changing room, if you know Shawcross from the fields, back to the changing room, I was sort of harassed all the way back, and I was in tears. My mum was in tears. She was there on one of those rare occasions when she attended because my dad couldn't be there, and it was one of those moments where you questioned why you did it. And in fairness, I had some really good support from the Shawcross Club on the day, and then my referee society and the local league. They took swift action against the club, but not all junior referees are probably able to deal with that, and many will finish off the back of it. And you know, the career that I ended up having, I may never have had because of that one particular day. And when you see some of the scenes, it's just horrific. I mean, I read something the other week that they'd I think stopped spectators at, was it one particular club in the Northwest Counties, I believe, because of you know, a number of incidents. And when you get into that stage where parents are banned from going to watch their own children from playing, it's just ridiculous. And on the occasions where I have gone and watched our junior referees refereeing, you just stand sometimes in amazement at some of the comments that are made. And I noticed that Warrington Referee Society this week have now issued their junior referees armbands to wear, which visibly points out that they are under 18. And that's the sad thing. I think the game I was doing was probably something like an under 11s game, and I would have probably been 12. You know, and you'll have adults abusing a child just because there happened to be a referee. You know, it's not an excuse to hurl abuse.
It's not a rugby league specific thing though. It's happening in all
absolutely
community
not.
sports.
Absolutely not.
And whilst that doesn't condone anything, it is a societal problem that seems to have bizarrely got worse since lockdown.
I believe so, and that's what I'm hearing. But for me, I just think it's easy to fix. Those clubs that have these people involved in their clubs, just get rid of them. Simple as that. That just the club doesn't deserve to get a bad reputation for the actions of what will be a minority of people. And if you're not careful, if you don't nip it in the bud, it escalates.
It's not difficult to identify them because they're
No.
members of your club. So,
and a number of occasions where you see now on social media where people are videoing something being said, and then as soon as that person realises it's being videoed, they stopped. Well, they shouldn't be doing it in the first place, should they?
mind you, we saw at a Premier League football match this weekend somebody come on the pitch and then run over to an opposing manager and start abusing them. It's like, if it's happening where there is a huge amount of security, it's got to be self-policing at our level, because
Totally.
we don't want stewards at community games.
Totally, yeah.
But then football is pretending that tragedy chanting is a new thing, when anyone who's been through some grounds in the past 50 years know that that's been going on forever. It needs self-policing too by the spectators, says Paul. And you have to, I'm not a parent, so it's easy for me to say this, but you have to question the fact that it doesn't reflect well on the kids either, does it? If your mum or dad's running on the pitch causing how you carry. I just don't.
I remember another game I did a Kirkley service area game. I think it was against Bradford, and the Burgess brothers' father was the coach, and luckily my changing room was through their dressing room, so I was there on my own. My mum and dad couldn't make it on that day, and again he helped shield me from the abuse. But I mean, it just shouldn't happen.
You don't want to say it's only a game, because it's not only a game. We know that. Otherwise, there wouldn't be podcasts and things and magazines and all this kind of stuff. But I just don't understand.
No. It does seem to be a bit of an epidemic at the moment, which is a concern.
Well, so we've got the French now, because not the French, not all of them.
The French government.
The French government, who have a history for ruining things for rugby league. And the latest one is the World Cup in 2025, which you may have seen today, is not happening in France. Steve Mascall's been reporting on this for months, it seems, and Johnny Davidson as well. And now it comes to pass that the French government aren't going to fund the World Cup as our wonderful government did for the last one here. And now the World Cup's in limbo. Well, it's in Australia, because they won it. But
Well, there's a board meeting of the IRL on Wednesday, after which there'll be a press conference, which I think will outline what options there are. You'd have to say that, knowing the sport as we do, there is only really one. It can't be in the Northern Hemisphere anywhere other than France, which it now isn't going to be, because we won't get the funding to have it here again 3 years after we last had it. And there's a moral case for saying, nor should we. So then it will put some pressure on the Australian Rugby League Commission to decide whether they financially want to support a World Cup. And you'd say that the probably best way of mitigating that would be that if there were several partners, so you could see a Pacific element to it, which might actually be a real boost to the game in that area. If there were some games in Samoa or Tonga or Fiji or PNG, they've got to have the stadiums that are big enough. So that is a concern, because although they have some nice stadiums, whether they would be big enough to host World Cup games. There's also a broadcasting element. How easy again is it to get pictures back from those places? I think New Zealand economically would quite like to be involved. That's again if there's commercial considerations to enable them to stage it, because I don't think they can generate the sufficient funding themselves. And it's about again then whether Brisbane would host the final, say, because that is the capital of rugby league, as we saw with their Magic Round, which was sold out every day. So economically, you possibly could do it at relatively short notice in the Southern Hemisphere. It's whether there is the will to do it. If it's not, I guess the only other option is to knock it back a year. We did have a short window from what should have been 21 but became 22 to 25. We could now say, well, because we had it in 22, it becomes 26, which gives another year for
But
the Southern
what impact
Hemisphere.
does that have on the 10-year calendar that we
haven't had? No, what it has an impact on is the finances of the International Rugby League, because the World Cup is virtually their only income generator. So obviously if they are then renewing their budgets to say it'll be another year before we get income in that we thought was coming, it's a massive issue. I think looking at the French element of it, first of all, my only criticism would be we seemed to announce something before we had anything signed and in writing that looked overly ambitious in the first place. So we were coming off the back of a really successful World Cup in terms, we don't know yet financially how successful it was, but in terms of visibility, profile, and the three variants being played together, it broke new ground, and all of those games were negotiated to be on free-to-air television, and everybody stepped back from it and said that was a real worthwhile exercise. All the players that went back from the Southern Hemisphere and the coaches in all the press conference were saying, yeah, our seasons are too long, but we want to be part of this. Don't deny us the opportunity for the Samoans getting to a final was massive for the nation. And I think we then thought for France to say straight off the back of that, we're going to have more nations there, we're going to have an extra tournament for the youth, that unless that's signed and sealed, you don't really say that, because all you're doing is setting yourself up for a fall, which has now happened. In terms of the way the world has changed, clearly we are in an economic crisis. It was overly ambitious probably for the French nation to have a Rugby Union World Cup, an Olympics, and then a Rugby League World Cup. If you're going to get squeezed financially, it's the third of those that's going to get it. You're not going to stop the Rugby Union World Cup now because it's, 6 months away?
Well, we can try.
Historically, they're not going to do it anyway. You're not going to turn around to the Olympics and say, we can't manage it. You're going to go to the sport that's the smallest of the three and say, I'm sorry, the funding we promised you isn't there anymore. We as a sport are not big enough to get alternative funding, particularly at short notice. We sometimes have to step back and realise what we are. But I just don't think the French should have painted such an ambitious picture before they'd signed contracts, and that does make us look particularly foolish, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it comes as a surprise, because my understanding during the last World Cup last year it was probably not going to happen in France, and that was only rumour, but it's obviously come to pass that it has been. So I think you're rightly saying in relation to adding a fourth tournament or add dimension to the tournament, just from a logistical point of view, speaking to some of the staff that were involved in the World Cup last year, logistically trying to organise 3 World Cups.
And then they had
happening
the
at the
PGRL
same
World
time.
Cup stuck
Absolutely,
in late on as well.
Yeah, and saying for them how difficult that was. And perhaps I'm maybe doing them a disservice, but maybe less experienced at delivering major events, as perhaps some of the Rugby League staff have been in the past. Then I think some of the World Cup staff from here last year were sort of surprised that France were prepared to take it to an extra World Cup. So, yeah, one would imagine it can only be down under, can't it, of some description. But the last World Cup down under, I think if I'm right, it was played across 5 different time zones. So there are challenges by spreading it to multiple nations with flights and time zones and all the logistical things that come with it. And whether you get government funding from places like Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, Papua New Guinea, you probably don't.
Is there clearly is a move behind the scenes economically to promote PNG as an NRL 18th team, and that's not coming off the back of a rugby league related reason. That's because there is money being put into that region, particularly from China, that they want to harness, and there would be a logistical reason for making sure that the Pacific Rim remains a rugby league centric area. So there might be some funding that we've not tapped into before, if there is the infrastructure. My concern as well was that there was immediate talk of increasing the number of nations in the women's and the wheelchair from 8 to 16. And 8 at the time seemed the limit of what we could do. And if you were having qualifying because there were more nations, that only enhances being at a World Cup. We haven't got another 8 women's nations and 8 wheelchair nations as we sit here today that could have played in that 2025 World Cup. So again, it's overly ambitious, both as a game and as a hosting nation, before we'd even started. Maybe we do have to leave it at the format that we had it, which was successful in 2021, and try and find I think it would be massive for New Zealand, who went through an awful time with COVID as a nation. Obviously we're isolated, we're cut off for 2 years, the Warriors couldn't play at home. It's all starting to come back a little bit. A World Cup in a couple of years' time might be a real good boost for them, but they're not a nation that could generate the finance themselves. They need help with that. But it'll be interesting to see what the IRL say on Wednesday as to what their options are. The only bit of hope in the press release that the IRL put out after the news broke was that they are fielding expressions of interest for the next two World Cups as well, 2029 and 2033. It'd be very interesting to know where they're from and how serious they are, because I think the other thing we shouldn't forget is 2025 should originally been in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that fell on its face because, again, there weren't enough guarantees up front before we announced it. When are we going to learn that we don't announce anything until...
Well, the World Cup's only ever been, hasn't it, forgive me if I'm wrong, in France, England, UK, whatever that makeup is, and down under.
Because that's where our power
Yeah,
is.
and I think the last World Cup down under was in PNG in New Zealand and Australia. I'm not aware of World Cup games that are taking place beyond those nations down under. So it's not that they're feeling expressions of interest, but where are they fielding them from? Can't imagine they're fielding them from anything other than basically Australia and England.
What will be interesting is you would think that there will always be entrepreneurs that want to promote America and Canada, that North American bloc, whether they're of sufficient magnitude to be able to pay for what we'd need. That's another aspect, because we've seen that fall flat before. I suspect the other area that would be interested probably could be the Far East, the Middle East, where there is money to put on sporting events. And you know, the Qatar World Cup is an indication of the fact that football is not huge over there, but they have money that they want to be seen to be staging major events. Now, whether they deem our World Cup to be a major event, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if expressions of interest have come in from regions where Rugby League isn't even played at the moment.
So you've heard it here first, 2029 World Cup, Rugby League, Qatar.
I'm going to have
I'm not sure we should endorse Qatar.
Discussions about sports washing and stuff.
We'll
just take the money from anyone.
But what is interesting is that there are areas of the world, and you know, the other irony, I think, at this time is that at the very moment that we're saying we're unsure of where the next World Cup will be, the NRL are in Las Vegas negotiating the opening round of the 2024 season to be in Sin City, and they're talking about allying it to other sporting events that weekend. So to have boxing, to have the UFC, to have the opening round of the NRL with all the various celebrities that we have in, well, both of them, that we have in Hollywood. You know, so it would be Souths against
Who's the other
Manly.
one?
And, you're asking me film star names, I don't know. Who's the guy with the number one season to go with Manly?
Hugh Jackman.
Yeah.
Hugh Jackman.
So Manly against South Sydney, so that you can get the various celebrities. So all of that, we've taken club games to America at the same time as we can't stage a World Cup. It's typical rugby league.
I mean, at least we won't have the head of the IRL moaning that the broadcasters in Europe aren't going to pay as much money as they want, as FIFA are doing at the moment for the Women's Football World Cup, which is coming to Australia and New Zealand this summer, because we know that, of course, all the money for broadcasting is going to be completely in Australia and New Zealand, and we'll play whenever they want, which is fine.
The only other USPs that we've got at the moment are women's and wheelchair, because I think the standard of NRL women is really high. So by the time 2025 comes around and some of our players have played in the competition, we become slightly better, being England. New Zealand, obviously, most of their top players play in that competition. So that the group game between Australia and New Zealand, not the final, was as good a game of women's rugby league as you could see. Not everybody likes women's rugby league, but there is a huge market for it, both in terms of broadcasting and sponsorship. And wheelchair, you know, I know we're all devotees of wheelchair and bang on about it endlessly, but that is a USP. The horrible rugby union version of Murder Ball that was on Channel 4 the other week, it isn't seen to be.
It doesn't look like rugby
No,
union,
exactly.
and that's rubbish.
So I reckon that those two bolted on to a men's World Cup do actually give us something in terms of commercial potential. And you're talking about in the Southern Hemisphere where the women's is big and high profile, the wheelchair's only just starting. It could.
Well, I mean, I wonder if the Australians could convince a former Golden Boot winner to put on their green and gold jersey as...
Well, the first training session has taken place in Auckland. I think it was last weekend or the weekend before, which has been held, I think, under the auspices of New Zealand Warriors. But they're trying to get people like Tawera Nikau involved, who clearly is eligible as a disabled player. But if he got involved, and there are other players, he's doing a documentary series at the moment about getting some older New Zealand players fit to play against a veteran Australian team. But there are people involved in that, like Shantae Harper, who had to give up because of concussion-related problems, who could play wheelchair. Now, again, if we're saying there's a chance of the World Cup being over there in 2 or 3 years, and those people could be involved in promoting wheelchair rugby league and maybe playing for New Zealand, there would be a groundswell of public support for that. So it's not the end of the world, but it is on the back of the positives of this week.
Yeah, I mean,
kicking the guts.
Again, going back to where World Cups have previously been held, it would ordinarily be the turn of Down Under to host it. I appreciate it's short notice now, but
listen, don't need to build any stadia. That's the thing, isn't it? It's all the infrastructure is there. It's just
I think this again is where IMG come into it, because it's not about what IMG are doing for the domestic game here, and we're seeing what they're trying to do, and it might be taking a bit longer than we would like, but they're obviously having an impact. They're not going to stop over the next 10 years that are left of their agreement. But the one thing they do have is television right negotiation, and they do have some of that in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, if they can be involved and can pull off a couple of television deals, then suddenly the pressure's off and it's easier to arrange. But again, sat in a studio here 12,000 miles away, that's a very easy thing to say, isn't it? But
might as well just host it on the Suguto pitch.
talking of television rights, the EFL have now agreed their deal, so
£7 billion. Was it 900 million?
900 odd million. Yeah, tremendous increase in their last deal.
But,
so
is there
I think it's copper that's left in the pocket for Rugby League.
They're showing, what is it, over 1,000 games. Is there any schedule left for anything?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think a lot of that's going to be streamed, isn't it? Which is where we need to work out what our streaming plan. Was there anything on our league this weekend? There was loads of rugby on, wasn't there? But I think there was nothing free. The women's nines wasn't. No,
I don't know.
I don't think. I mean,
didn't see anything.
I didn't see promoted as on there, so I assume it wasn't. But I don't know. Johnny says we've never had a night, so Kev, it has to happen. Well, write your letter into the honest.
How do we know if you may have turned it down?
Yeah.
You don't know.
Well, so Lindsay Hoyle was interviewed this week. I heard him being interviewed, and he was saying that he's lobbying for that to happen.
He's got to fill in the forms. Does he not know the rules?
But this has to be a 3-year gap from one on to the next. So I think reading between the lines, the next opportunity that he's eligible to receive an award, I'm sure he'll get it.
And I think he would accept on behalf of the MND Association in Leeds Hospital Charity. He wouldn't if it was just down to him.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. But yeah.
So it's a goal kick.
No, it's because he's involved in rugby union now. He's bound to get it.
Headbutting Luke Donald. As I said, that was the best game I've ever seen. That was the best game I've ever seen. Leeds and Cass 20-all. Loved it. Is that all the other news that isn't things on the field?
There's a fair bit there.
I think of anything else that's happened. I mean, we obviously, since we had 2 weeks off, thanks to A, the workers, the proletariat, May Day, B, the hoi polloi. Not the hoi polloi?
No, the
hoi
polloi
other
is
one.
yeah,
that's the proletariat. The other ones. I went to school in Wakefield. I learned any of this stuff.
the ruling class,
the elites,
as opposed to the working
the
class.
actual elites, as opposed to the made-up elites. Because of course you got the big hat, so that was good. We haven't been on for 2 weeks, but we were at England France. That was good as a thing, you know.
Again, I think that's one of the ones that said it was better in the stadium than it was probably as a televisual event, because the main thing you got was the amount of time the women and the men's teams were out signing autographs. In fact, they both had to be pulled in because there were so many kids that wanted selfies, and that's what we're about. So whether the games were overly competitive or not, the audience that was there really enjoyed it. There was a good atmosphere.
Sean went to his press conference, came back out and did selfies and stuff, which in the time it took the coaches to come out on Thursday to do a press conference.
But the women's players had to be almost hauled off the sideline so that the men's game could start. And I think some of the men's players that were still out there were told to get in and do some media before they'd finished doing all the autographs. So, yeah, I think, forget the results, I don't think it told us anything that we didn't already know, but it wasn't as damning an occasion as some people said it were, just looking at the score.
It's a wonderful cake, but Warrington...
There was some wonderful cake.
Warrington's venue was everything that we said beforehand it would be, so meh. And it takes us back to, because now the test series against Tonga has been announced, and I hope it doesn't turn into a Sam Tompkins testimonial series, as some suggest it should be, because we should be looking forward to the World Cup in 2025, brackets wherever that is being held. But Huddersfield, Leeds, St Helens. Well, St Helens is the obvious one, obviously, because Tonga, Christian Wolf, they're there. What's his name? Conrad Hurrell. Leeds, centre of the universe. Huddersfield, nah. Could be, I know it's. Why is it keeping money in rugby league? Huddersfield Giants don't own the stadium, do they?
No, Kirklees own the stadium.
So you can't use that excuse that we're playing Warrington, we're giving money back to rugby league.
I think it's economic. I think it's solely economic. That they've worked out the finances and what they're going to have to guarantee Tonga. And they've said, well, I'd rather go for 3 grounds of around about 20 to 25,000 that we will definitely sell out. There's guaranteed income there. Nobody can say that either the prices were too high or it was too difficult to get to a venue. So we want 60,000 people across those 3, and if we get them, we've had a financially successful series. That does limit your ambition a little bit. I think there were a lot of people that said, really we need to take a game to London if we're serious about, is the capital important to the sport. You don't necessarily have to take it to the Emirates or Tottenham Hotspur. You could have taken it to Brentford, for example, which is, again, a similar size stadium, but you've got some kind of maybe residual legacy. The fact that, the Antipodean population is around that part of London, they would have supported it. We saw that the Samoans at Arsenal weren't in huge number, but they're incredibly passionate, so the Tongans would have been similar. So is that a lack of ambition? Possibly. I think we said before it was announced that I personally might have taken a game to Middlesbrough. I know that's a bigger stadium, but that's where the Tongans were based. So they did quite a lot of development work around the northeast. It's only an hour away from traditionally where we are. It's near enough to Newcastle, so there's a bit of legacy from a Magic weekend. And it's a new stadium for a lot of people who wouldn't have been there. So your traditional rugby league fan would say, if I only ever go to Middlesbrough once, I'll go.
See the big bridge, go to the rugby.
But that's not a bad place to have a night out. I just think that, again, we went for the conservative option, and you can see why. But
Palmos. Rotherham, Derby, another one I thought of.
Nottingham.
Milton Keynes, blah, blah, all these. They are where they are now anyway, so we'll see what happens in 2024, whatever.
I think what it does do, it does put pressure on to sell those stadium out, doesn't it? And it's up to the Rugby League public, you've got to get behind it. So it's easy for people to criticise, they should have gone to London. Well, make sure you buy your tickets and go, because actually when I looked at the ticket prices, they're reasonably priced. And I think
especially if you go to all 3,
well,
it's actually quite cheap.
That's what I was just going to say, you can get a ticket to all 3 for 60 quid, I think, which I think's, really good value. And as you say, they're all accessible within an hour and a half's drive, so there's no reason why people shouldn't go to all 3 if you're buying a ticket. So to some extent, the expectation is that they do sell them out. I don't know what Headingley holds these days, 20, yeah,
just short of 20.
So like you said, 60,000 maybe is what they're probably looking at. I'm just disappointed because I think it is a lack of ambition really, and I think they should have pushed the envelope a little bit on that middle option with Huddersfield. And you've got St Helens and Leeds as your bankers, and then you sort of not rolling the dice. But I think there just has to be a game in London for me. Simple as that. And I get the argument that if you're going to take it somewhere else, you may take it to Newcastle, and Newcastle probably is too big at St James's Park. You're not going to take it to Kingston Park probably. So then
that's too small.
Yeah, and so for me it just has to be in London.
There was a test match between England and New Zealand at Queen's Park Rangers that sold out about 23,000. Brentford now on their new community stadium with easy access links.
But the argument is that when we've gone to the Emirates, when we go to Wembley, X percentage is sold to people in London. Why can't we tap into that people? I mean, if we're only needing, for example, 20,000 people in the stadium, we're not needing to fill the Emirates. We're not needing 50, 40, even 40,000 people, are we?
I think you need a bigger marketing budget, because the thing about Huddersfield is you've got a club there that can help you sell it. You've got a stadium that people are going to maybe once or twice a year anyway, so they know it. Whereas if you go to Brentford, you're going to have to spend a little bit more money telling people. But don't you speculate?
And we don't know what the cost of hiring a stadium is, whether it is more expensive to hire a stadium in London,
or even if it's available on that weekend because of football.
Because of the football, and you're factoring in travel from the north and the cost of living crisis, etc. I get the arguments for keeping it conservative, but I just think it's disappointing.
I was listening to Talk Sport the other night, Paul Ross's programme. We had Martin Calvin, right? He's talking about his book.
Doesn't talk about it enough.
On one of the adverts on this commercial radio station was for the Rugby Union Premiership semi-finals. Not a promo for Sky for TalkSport Scottish, but actual come buy tickets to go see Sale Sharks. You remember them? So advertising can be done.
Yeah, I think that would have helped.
But 2 in the morning.
That will have been helped. That I think aren't TalkSport commentating on those games.
But it was well. Why don't we?
Well, maybe we'll. Part of the radio rights will go to commercial radio, and then part of that deal will be a level of advertising around it.
But again, we talked about before about the legacy of the World Cup. So the legacy of the World Cup is what? And I appreciate it was a fairly northern-based tournament, again, because of government finance, that it was about the northern powerhouse.
Not levelling up. It was
they're not levelling up, But, we did have one game in London, was it, in the World Cup? But I still think we should have had a game in London.
Mm-hmm. So. I think so, because what we do know is there is a ready-made market down there if we can tap into it. Mm. But what London Broncos are doing almost single-handedly, whether they're doing it good, bad, or indifferently, they are part of the family. London Scholars as well, to a slightly lesser extent. If we're not going to support what they're doing.
No, and if IMG
why
were to rate the allocations of the grounds based on their specification, the RFL perhaps wouldn't score that well on catchment area, would they?
Absolutely not. Good point.
Could play at Bradford, beyond the stadium. We'll talk about Bradford in a second.
Do we have to?
Do we know how much a weekend sales are going?
Not mentioned.
It's not been mentioned.
It won't be mentioned. Well, there's 3/4 of the clubs don't give their attendance figures anymore. So.
We come off a weekend where it was a sellout at Wembley apparently for the Women's Cup final, but they had 77,000 there, which is a world record, which is a great achievement and would sound better if they hadn't made a big song and dance about it selling out.
And talking of women's games, there was on the same weekend as the England-France game, there was England-France women, wasn't there, at Twickenham, in front of a record crowd of, what was it, 60,000? Yeah, I mean that.
But then that had something riding on it. That was the
and I get
nations decide.
The players won the mid-season international trophy, which didn't have a name.
But no, it was an unfortunate comparison.
It was, but as IMG has said, that this England-France mid-season fixture is here to stay.
Yeah.
And that's part of their plan to have as a regular mid-season fixture. But for me, the game has to be, at least alternating between France and England.
And ideally, it should, at this moment in time, other than what's happened today with the World Cup, always be in France. Because I think you can guarantee that International Rugby League gets an audience way beyond Club Rugby League over there. And it gives the England coach the opportunity to actually take the squad and see what they're like in a touring environment.
Yeah. And you think you'd probably get a bigger crowd anyway in France than you would in the UK.
As Paul asked, why don't clubs give attendances anymore? I don't know. They always have, and now they've stopped.
I would have thought the VAT inspector would have needed to know.
This is the conspiracy in the older days. It was always lower than you thought.
For the IMG scoring, you need to give. They'll need access to their attendance figures.
IMG Ball. We're looking forward to that rebranding. Is that what it's going to be called now? The IMG Ball Super. New big trophy. Craig Lingard. He's off to Cass. But I tell you what. Obviously I support the team that's rock bottom. Have we still 12 less points than London Scholars? Let's have a look. London Scholars 126. Wakefield 77. But I say, I wouldn't say Wakefield is toxic at the moment. People saying you're not fit to wear the shirt. That's fine. That's fine. But I'll tell you what, Castleford, man, talk about toxic. Their fans on the internet and the social media. They already want Andy last out. He's only been in there 2 minutes. Lingard in, they're saying now. But there he is. With his flip-flops and his daft hats, Batley beating Toulouse at the weekend. Was that 2 wins? 2 wins in the space of 5 days or whatever for Batley. And here they are.
2 games in 2 days against French opposition.
There you go. And here he is. He's now the assistant coach of Castleford. Now their head coach next year, apparently, if the fans have it their way in the championship, because I think Wakefield are going to finish above them. But it's...
Why do they think Wakefield are going to get 3 wins?
Castleford. I don't know how many
times they played enough times.
No. We're going from some Huddersfield, they're rubbish now. We'll talk about them in a minute. But Castleford, I don't know if the pressure has got to their fans because Wakefield's stand is actually happening now. You can see it. And I'm not taking any pleasure in this. It's
Doesn't sound like it.
No,
I'm really not laughing.
look at the league table. They're going down. The man said on the telly, but they're not happy at Castleford, and
No, but I think you can understand it, can't you? You know, I mean,
They
they've
had
had
the
a
problem
good
is-
squad on paper. I just think, you know, Andy Lassop obviously was appointed, but in strange circumstances, really, because no one would have anticipated Lee Radford would have left after, 2 or 3 games. And then they're left in the position of, do we jump ship entirely here and basically get rid of everything that we've got in place and start again not even mid-season. So I think
For which there is a cost.
absolutely, and I think that they're in a very difficult position, the Castleford board. I think to some extent probably having Wakefield in the competition helps them at the moment. But look, he's got to put his own stamp on it, and people, I think, have just got to be patient, and that's difficult in this day and age. I get that, because everybody's calling for everybody's head, aren't they? You know, at half time, people were saying in the Wigan Leeds game everybody wanted Rowan Smith out, and then by the end of the game, he was next on the honours list. So, you know, it can change very quickly, as we discussed the other week with Hull. So, well, I think they've just got to stick patient, and if it doesn't improve much, then they've just got to hope that Wakefield don't pick up the wins to get past them.
I think there has been an issue with recruitment at Cass, because I think they've got quite an ageing squad, and that was always going to need an overhaul at some stage, and it was who was going to do it and when were you going to do it. I think Andy Last, with some of the players that he's been linked with, is starting to do that. But again, it's about the amount of money you've got to spend, and if you've got to change a lot of your squad, you're not going to tie up money in big name players early on and then find that you've got no depth. And more I think for Castleford at the moment is just that they're not playing a style of rugby that is associated historically with the way Castleford fans like to see their team play. There was an over-reliance perhaps under Lee Radford of going for size and power, which is very much in the image of the team he had at Hull, with again a salary cap and a contract system not as easy as it used to be. Craig Lingard is an interesting appointment. I think, to his absolute credit, he's staying and wanted to finish a job that he started at Batley this year, and has negotiated that the remainder of this season he's on dual reg, because he wants to take Batley to Wembley more than anything. They've never been there, and they're 80 minutes away in the 1895, and I think that on the back of it, he's got to a grand final and he makes the playoffs every year. If he was to take them to Wembley as well, I think he would acknowledge that there's not a lot more he could do at Batley.
There's a ceiling there, isn't there? There's only so much you can do.
And as an ambitious guy, which we know he is, he wants an opportunity to coach at the highest level he can. So you can see why he's taken it. But I think one of the remits he's been given as well is to identify championship players that could play at a higher level, which again might be the way Cass go about their rebuild at the moment. Which would make economic sense.
Yeah, if you work into a tighter budget, then it's obvious, isn't it?
So you can see why that partnership of Last and Lingard probably is the way they should be going.
Produce your own players because they're cheaper, and look at the championship.
And if you haven't got a Derek Beaumont, for example, able to write check after check after check, then there's not much you can do.
But it's really interesting again about some of the now we've passed May the 1st. Everyone who is off contract is available to negotiate. So we are looking at some players at certain clubs, and you know we. Take 2 examples, Owen Trout and Sam Walters, who are good young kids at the clubs that they're at the moment where fans want them to stay, but the value that they are to other clubs is greater than the value they can possibly be to the club that they're at the moment. You can't hold on to them in a salary cap system, because both of those players, who are not the first name on the team sheet at the moment, with the greatest respect to them, have been offered increased contracts, quite significantly increased contracts at the clubs that they are at. But there are other clubs that want to build it around that young player who might be losing their top end players, who will offer them more, and the economic value then becomes more than the playing value. And as a fan, that's hard to see and take, but it's just the way things are.
Luke Gale, Paul McShane, there's the 2 examples that spring to mind of players who obviously came through and were part of the system at Leeds who could be kept on for whatever reason.
Yeah, sometimes it's a playing reason, sometimes it's incremental contract increases, and you look at St Helens and Leeds, who managed to keep players there that were, you know, above their economic value in the market because the players wanted to stay there because they were part of something that was bigger. Individually, as a young kid, you have to make a decision about your economic future, and for some it is, I will move on and I will get paid more and I'll look after my young family, and there's nothing wrong with that. But fans need to take a step back, and if a club is prepared to release a player because that player is being paid more money elsewhere, that's capitalism.
As Paul pointed out, fickle fans, half of the Saints fans now want Wello out. I would, they're still going to win the conference final, because I'm not going to back Warrington to do so. Is that all the news? I think that is all the news now. Well, we don't want to talk about
Mark Dunning got...
after that worldwide exhaustive search, they got rid of the coach at the end. Yeah. Doesn't make any sense, does it, when they... You would suggest, and I don't know obviously what's going on at Bradford, that a coach is going to be hamstrung if he's been forced to play players who land at his feet on the Thursday before a game or whatever.
Again, I think you've got to be an experienced coach to manage and handle that, and he wasn't. Which again, I think you've got to question the appointment in the first place, and so if you're going to go down that road of dual reg and some overseas signings, and that requires a coach with a certain degree of experience. Brian Noble mentioned in the magazine, obviously before a couple of coaches had lost their jobs, that there is a very different imperative for somebody who is a development coach, and it's not about winning and losing, it's about bringing players, and a performance coach, when it's at the elite end and you are judged solely on 80 minutes every week. Mark Dunning and to a lesser extent Mark Applegarth are development coaches in their careers today. They're not yet performance coaches. Bradford needed a performance coach, but they decided to appoint a development one.
Tim says the first team salary cap is a red herring. The case of Jack Croft and Isaac Shaw is an important and underreported story. The interesting thing about that story is, and I'm not speaking from a Wakefield perspective here because it's just a point of order in general. Should clubs be compensated for developing players? You should probably say, yeah, possibly. But if the players generic were of use to clubs, then those clubs would have paid that fee.
It's market value.
And the fact that they haven't been, and Wakefield also didn't offer them a new or whatever.
But it's also about how clubs operate the salary cap, and there are some administrators who are very, very good at eking every pound out of what they spend. There are others that don't plan that far ahead and get caught with contracts that they have to honour. So sometimes it's always about your administration as well.
Or giving jobs to players' wives as cleaners. The week in Super League started on Thursday at the home of Rugby League, Bellevue, where Matt Horton was on the pitch.
And you were there?
I was there. The first time I've been this season, I thought, well, hey, if I turn up, they might win. Wakefield 6, Hull FC 26. Didn't work. I saw a lot of people saying the game was rubbish. I thought it was just boring. Wakefield haven't got any creativity whatsoever. They're not really great at defending. It's all Matty Ashurst's fault for not shouting and stuff, which is a nonsense argument. He leads by example as a captain in a way we mentioned earlier in the programme. Wakefield just aren't very good. That's why they've lost 12 games. And Hull were better than them on the night. And it was a game of Rugby League and Hull won. I don't know what else you can...
I didn't think either. I had the game on, but it was in the background. I didn't attract my attention too much. My impression was that Hull weren't great either, to be honest.
But they've got some defensive grit about them over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I know.
And that was the difference.
You can see that they're turning a corner, I think. And they had enough in the tank to get the job done in the end fairly comfortably.
In the press conference afterwards, I was stood there listening to Mark Applegarth, and I think, I've got nothing to ask you because there's nothing I can ask you that I couldn't have asked you last week or the week before or the week before that or 5. Because it talks about the effort, and I'm not going to say the players aren't putting effort in or whatever, but as some fans were saying, you're not fit to wear the shirt. The problem with, I would say, with Wakefield's squad comes down to recruitment. Too much money has been spent on players in the wrong positions or imports who just aren't good enough, and that's why they're playing for Wakefield. And that might sound harsh, but the league table, after 12 games, it doesn't lie after 12 games. After a game it lies, but after 12 games it doesn't lie. Those players are not good enough to play in Super League because they've scored 77 points.
But Luke Gale.
Luke Gale's here, yeah. He's here now.
No, I think the other thing is the danger for Wakefield is they've got a really tricky cup tie this week.
Well, I mean, listening to again the
And the
coach
trouble
after
is,
game,
it's not about winning that cup tie. It's like if you then lose that cup tie, the other half of your season disappears overnight.
Well, I don't think there's an expectation that they will win, will they? They've already lost at home to Lee.
Yeah, but I think it's if they don't win, then
all the eggs are in one basket anyway.
Yeah.
with
But there's no payday down the line. There's no, getting to a cup
And
semi-final.
I think there were comments made sort of by Michael Carter this week, weren't they, about it could potentially be a godsend
That's
if
the
we get
worrying
relegated.
thing after 12 games.
That was the leading sort of sentences prior to that I thought were reasonable. That was an odd expression.
we're preparing for the middle eights.
Because I didn't really get what he was meaning by why would it be a godsend? I don't really get why it would be a godsend. Perhaps the contracts become null and void for players that are on contract. Maybe that's why, and then you can those players that you're tied in on contracts that you want to get rid of, you can get rid of without.
He's very
paying
friendly
penalties.
with Neil Hudgell, and clearly Hull KR going down gave him a chance to almost reboot the club. And looking at where they are now, maybe he's saying it wouldn't be the end of the world if we had half the salary cap that we had to spend, if we still completed our stadium, if we got a similar level of crowds in the Championship that we'll get in Super League. Admittedly, there's a couple of games that we won't get a sellout crowd, but we will still.
And they may have success on the field,
which
gives
and that'll bring people back.
Yeah.
So I can see why he said what he said, and he's mainly being overly honest. But to say that after 12 games, that is almost like we hold our hands up, we expect to go down.
But I think some people may have suggested pre-season with the choice of coach and some of the players saying that was.
I think it's like the World Cup. It's an economic thing. It's a decision which road you want to go down. Do you cut your cloth according to your means? And at some point, that means you can't be in Super League. Is that what he's saying, or have fans still got an unrealistic expectation? Looking at the squad, looking at almost this admission every time that we spend less salary cap. It's not a badge of honour.
No, but I think this year more than probably most, I think nearly every pundit had Wakefield as to be relegated. So, probably not a surprise for Wakefield fans. I think the surprise that's come is that the inability to score.
Yeah.
It's not that they're not competing in some games, are they?
I mean, the year that London went down, their fans got full value for money from them because they were scoring points, they were ticking off the odd surprise result. It got to the end of the season and they were still in it. And I think if
that's
Wakefield
only 2 or 3 years ago, isn't it? 3 or 4 years ago.
If Wakefield fans could see that, it makes it a little bit more palatable. I think after 12 games to almost be saying we expect to be relegated, that would be the concern, I think.
But the numbers he's wanting to turn up and watch haven't turned up even when they had vague seasons where they were flirting with the playoffs in the Chris Chester. So
I think the IMG era is going to, is what's the rainbow in the sky potentially for Wakefield, isn't it?
we're just going to ask if enough people in Wakefield, in Huddersfield, in Salford care enough to have a.
Well, I'm not sure you can blame the fans.
I'm not blaming the fans, but the people
got to give
not
them
the people who
something.
turn up, but just.
I reckon it must be hard to know that at the moment, you're going to watch your team for 80 minutes. There may well be the effort there, but you're not going to score.
You know what, effort.
Effort's a
care.
given. Effort's a given.
Yeah. If I'm paying £25, I want to see some entertainment. I don't effort. Meh. I'll go watch the kids. I'll go watch the women's team. Well, I know they're putting an effort in. I know they're losing 100-0 or whatever, but at least they're trying.
Yeah, I think you've got to have something you can get behind. And if it was a team full of local young kids learning their trade, then again, you can put up with that.
I don't want to name names of players because I think it's fair.
No, I don't. I wouldn't.
So that was well done, Hull.
Hull is I suppose the only beacon of light for Wakefield and Castleford is Hull, because 3 weeks ago we were lumping Hull in. And
but I remember
remarkable.
saying, people need to be patient. But I think it's different at Hull.
Yeah.
I appreciate they both got new coaches, etc. But I just sensed that there was an opportunity at Hull to turn it round, which I don't see at Wakefield, if I'm honest. But their performance against Wigan, because we've not been on since then, I thought was tremendous.
That goal line defence.
Yeah.
I mean,
They deserve to win. concerned sitting as a neutral was thinking, Wigan are going to pinch this game at the end, and it would have been undeserved really for Wigan to win that game. Hull did deserve to win that. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't a polished performance, it wasn't a perfect performance, but what it showed was...
It's just getting wins.
But it showed their desire
to
win, didn't it? And whatever they'd worked on in that international window, it worked.
One of the interesting things after the England-France women's game, I can't remember which person it was who kept saying it, was trusting the process.
Oh, God.
And I can't remember who it was. And obviously this must be a Stuart Barrow phrase, and we know it is an Ian Watson phrase. And unfortunately, the process for the Giants at the moment is not working because they are just 4 points above Castleford, 8 points above Wakefield. But they lost again on Friday night, heavily to Lee, who, again, all the credit to Lee. And you've got to think going into that Challenge Cup game this weekend, Derek Beaumont's thinking, because we know what he's like, he would love to walk out at Wembley in his leopard print suit for the Challenge Cup final. But 30 points to 4 for the Leopards, another big impressive win. Huddersfield are just this... What are they? What's going on? What's happened to Huddersfield?
I think that is the case of the overachievers beating the underachievers. I don't know if that's a fair... again, don't in any way want to detract from the way Lee are playing at the moment, which is sensational. The first half, but you look at some of the mistakes that Huddersfield are making. Tuilola here, who we were told consistently by Ian Watson was the best fullback in the competition, throws the ball away.
I don't think he was when he said that, by the way. And I'm not putting Tuilola here down.
One-on-one tackle.
Yeah, one-on-one tackle that wasn't. But that is indicative of something that isn't working for Huddersfield at the moment. The team selection seems different. Buying Jake Connor, those of us at the beginning of the season who said, how is he going to fit in? And if you're serious about process, you're bringing in a guy who we haven't yet quite worked out, although he can do some mercurial things, what his best position is.
I just wonder to what extent that signing was led by Ian Watson. I may be wrong. It just doesn't seem like an Ian Watson signing to me, and there's danger. And I'm not putting this all on Jake Connor, by the way.
No, absolutely not.
But something is not right from the outside looking in. They're not performing.
With the players they've got on the field, I get Theo Farge is a big loss, but you look at who they've got in terms of their squad compared to a team like Wakefield, and you just go, I don't know why this is happening. Because it's happening every week.
But I think elite performance, so much of it is down to mental attitude, preparation, confidence, all those aspects that go into it. None of which can't really be coached. It's just how those players are managed. And I think one of the difficulties they've got at Huddersfield is that the squad is so big. With the injuries to some of the key players, that's obviously a challenge. But they don't really seem to know what their best 13 is.
That's the issue, I think.
Kieran Rush made his debut with Liam Rush's younger brother this week.
Actually in the World Cup was
Jamaica.
Good for Jamaica.
Yeah, and so that was pleasing to see. But from I was sure it was disappointing from the team's perspective of the performance. But he made his start at half back. But you've got Jake Connor and you've got Will Price,
who was dropped because he felt that the previous week when he'd had three creative players that didn't. I think you're right that he doesn't know what his best starting 13 is. But the forwards, you think of a team coached by Ian Watson. It's difficult to break down. We all remember. Well, you remember better than we do. The Challenge Cup final last year. It took until 3 minutes from time for Wigan to break them down, because the one thing you knew about an Ian Watson coach team is they won't give you a lot.
No, the percentage, they play the percentages.
But to be 30-0 down at home at half-time to Lee, with the greatest respect to Lee, that isn't a Huddersfield performance.
No, which to me points to off-field stuff, really, and the management of the team, the players, the set of players for me. And that's always going to be a challenge. Paul Roby was saying the other day that to some extent there is maybe an advantage by having a small squad, because players such as sort of Rhys Williams, who accepts he's almost a squad player, will come in on the wing when somebody's injured or somebody's perhaps out of favour or whatever, but he almost accepts that that's his position in that squad. Whereas when you've got players that want to be playing in their starting 13 and can't get in the starting 13,
right position.
Yeah, and then they're almost having to wait for somebody to make a mistake to get in. does that almost feed into that? I don't know. I'm not. There must be so many different reasons that go into performances. But I just think they are some of the aspects. But looking from the outside in, when you look at Lee and the way that they perform, they're clearly working together as a unit.
Yeah,
they've
and
got
like
great
you say,
team
they
spirit.
haven't got a huge squad, so
no, but they've got the confidence.
The best out of it.
Yeah, and perhaps to some extent, people. I never anticipated that Lee would be fighting for relegation this year. I thought there would be mid to lower end, and they probably are. You're right, probably exceeding to some people's expectations. But once you get a win, and it breeds that confidence, doesn't it? Huddersfield just need a win. Who do they play this week in the cup?
Salford.
Oh.
Which in the Ian Watson derby.
Yeah, and I think Salford will be favourites, wouldn't they, going into that?
Yeah.
They have to be.
But I also think that the problem for Huddersfield looks to me like they can't get a performance at the moment. It's not like they were losing narrowly in some of the early games of this season, but the last 2 or 3 weeks they haven't looked on the pace at all. But that's not the same issue at Hull, where I think you've got a new coach and you need to find. He wants to play a certain way. You might not have the players, or they might not initially have the understanding of it. Ian Watson was there all last year and changed a lot of things at Huddersfield. So this should have been the year, having got to a cup final, that they were doing what Warrington did in the early stages of the season. They were coming out, maybe putting 7 or 8 wins together. Then they might have come up against a St Helens or a Wigan. That would have tested exactly where they were. You then go back and say, right, well, if we're going to beat those teams, we just need to tweak this. Actually, Huddersfield don't look anywhere near like Hull were at the...
But when people ask questions about coaches, then that's a more legitimate... I'm not suggesting Ian Watson should be sacked by
No.
I don't think he should be. But when people ask the question, that will be more of a legitimate question on the basis of what you've just said, in that he's been there a while, they've built, and they should be progressing this year, and they've clearly gone backwards. So,
But again, another very interesting cup tie, because if half of their season disappears, the struggle now is... Well, it's not that much of a struggle, they're only, 4 points off the playoffs, but suddenly there's a massive pressure.
Yeah, and they've got a game in hand, haven't they?
Yeah,
a game in hand against St Helens, and I appreciate that, but they have got a game in hand.
They need a return on the investment that Ken Davey has put in, particularly over the last 2 years, and probably to get Ian Watson in the first place. It wouldn't have come cheap with all the staff that he brought with him. If you go out of the Challenge Cup this weekend at the first available opportunity, there is massive pressure on Huddersfield then for the going into Magic weekend.
Castleford 22, Catalans 46, 34-6 up at half time, the Dragons. I think we said all we can say about Castleford almost, but impressive performance from the Catalans. It's 46 points away from home when the traditional lazy argument is they can't win away from home, and there they are winning by 20-odd points at Castleford on Friday night.
I think you look at, again, the impression you've got of teams, and the fact that Steve McNamara has almost had to play a squad of players that wouldn't be his first choice for some of his games this year to go to Castleford when you're coming out of an inconsistent run. That's a great result, particularly a great first half. I think I'm quite impressed with what Catalan are doing this year.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting in that game because they play Warrington this week in the cup.
Because they've got something to play for, Warrington having beaten them in.
Well, exactly, and Warrington don't seem to be firing on all cylinders at the moment. So I don't know whether you could call that game, to be honest.
It's a shame that we won't be able to see.
No.
Yeah.
That win for Warrington over Hull KR 21-14 is very much the sign of a team grinding out a win because they need to get a win, and they're still top of the table, and they had a little bit of a wobble, but that's the kind, 2 wins in a row. Granted, the other one was against Wakefield, but
neither of them convincing.
No.
Which is interesting because, and again, I didn't see it because we've got this ridiculous ability to put all the games on at the same time. But injury to Matt Parcell turned the game. Hull KR started really, really well, 12-0 up, and I think you do look at clubs like Huddersfield and where they are at the moment, and Hull KR and where they are, and you can see a club that's progressive and moving forward, and everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet. And Hull KR are doing some recruitment whereby some of the guys have already been told they're not going to be there next year, but they've done it openly and they've done it up front, and some of those guys already know where they're going to be playing next year, but they seem to have this buy-in to what the new coach is doing, and they're at the top end of the league and they're playing good rugby, and I suspect that Huddersfield will feel that Hull will feel a bit aggrieved about that result if they've lost a very influential player. I don't know if the incident was penalised.
Well, it reminds me, I didn't mention during the Castleford brief chat against Catalans how Adam Milner was nearly decapitated and got the green card. I think that was not deemed as anything by the match review panel today.
Well, there was a Catalan player charged, but I'm not sure whether it. I think it was for that. I think it was for that incident. I think he's got a grade B, Catalan player. What I didn't agree with though was the Castleford doctor putting the incident on Twitter.
Must be taking lessons from some clubs.
Does that undermine the match? Is that bringing the game
into
disrepute?
I just don't think that's the way to deal with something. If he has a problem with it, address it through the proper channels. I don't think you should be publishing.
Did he say something about he wasn't happy with the green card?
He accepted in his tweets about accepts that referees or officials may miss things, etc., etc. But I just, the point about the green card was, look, it was missed on field. The officials missed it. It should have been a penalty clearly, and probably a yellow card. But if they've missed it and a player stays down, then they have to apply the policy, which is that the game has stopped because a player is injured, and if he's not going off for a concussion assessment, he has to get a green card.
The way Milner falls makes it look even worse, doesn't it? I'm just watching it again here over and over and over and over again.
But my question would have been, well, in Super League you have the ability to review the footage. The doctor has the ability to review footage on non-TV games.
Yeah.
So if they've seen that there's been contact to the head, well, why hasn't he gone off on a concussion assessment? In which case a green card wouldn't needed to have been issued. So I don't get it. The doctor who's put the tweet on there has had the footage. He's, in theory, should have been able to make a decision at the time the game was stopped to remove him for a concussion assessment. And I'm not being funny. I have seen concussion assessments declared as concussion assessments when I would question, albeit I'm not a doctor, whether they were actually concussion. So I think it's inappropriate for a doctor to be placing incidents like that on Twitter for the public jury to be making decisions on it.
It's like players questioning referee decisions during televised games when they're watching and the mates have got in bother.
Yeah, well, you also have a player in response to that commenting about what he would have received as a ban. It's ridiculous.
Wigan and Leeds, Phil. What was that all about? I was out. I was at the wrestling in Ossett, so I missed all this.
It was an interesting game, wasn't it? It was exactly the game of two halves, and I was surprised Kyle Walker, when he did the interview, didn't suggest it was a game of two halves.
I think we've now seen that Zane Tesivano's got 2 games for his challenge. I don't think too many people are going to argue about that.
Well, it was rightly sent off. It was shoulder direct to head. Ball had gone. From that point of view, it ticks the boxes. I get that people will say, well, hang on a minute, why wasn't somebody else given the card? And you can't deal.
It's not what's out.
You've got to just deal with what you've got in front of you. And on that incident, in my opinion, it was dealt with entirely correctly.
I think there's a really interesting fine line between players who are told to put pressure on the kicker and when a ball has actually left. But that's immaterial to where the actual contact is. Everybody knows that you cannot hit around the head.
Yeah, this was a passer, not a kicker, wasn't it, in this incident?
But it's putting pressure on the ball player, and it's a very fine margin. If you slow something down as much as you do on the television, it tends to look a little bit worse.
Yeah.
And I think actually he wasn't that far off it being a very, very good challenge on putting pressure on Harry Smith, except that it should have been lower. And the fact that it wasn't, you pay the consequence.
And look, and this ultimately is why, if that game's not on TV, I'm not suggesting it wouldn't be seen, because my impression was that the on-field officials identified it immediately, penalised it immediately, and then as part of the process they wait for the replays and the opinion of the video referee, and ultimately then, as on-field officials, they make the determination of what the outcome should be. But look, going back to that Castleford game, it was clearly missed on-field. Now, if that had been on TV, the game would have been stopped at the injury, and they would have dealt with that incident, and he probably would have been given a yellow card. But for me, yeah, you're right. You're talking inches, and that's why it's difficult for referees in live play to determine whether is he committed, yes or no, And if he's not committed, then it's a penalty. And then if it's a penalty, is it anything more than a penalty? And we're talking inches here between the shoulder contact and it either hitting his head or otherwise.
But the technique has to be you hit lower.
Yeah.
But as a game, it had everything really.
Yeah, the quality wasn't great in the first half, though, was it?
No.
Leeds couldn't keep hold of the ball.
There were two things that kept Leeds in the game. One was that the defence was pretty committed on and around their goal line. Although they conceded 14 points, it could have been 28-0.
Yeah.
The other thing was Harry Newman's first interception. I think that changed the game a little bit. It gave Leeds something to cling on to. And it just put a tiny little bit of doubt, I think, in Wigan's mind. The way Leeds played with 12 players in the second half was exceptional in a lot of respects. All the mistakes they made in the first half, they didn't make in the second half.
No,
but they did play some great running rugby.
Oh, they did, but again, does that go back to, we've had a bloke sent off, we're under the pump, we're away at Wigan.
With nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Well, they played the
pressure's
same at
off.
Catalan last year. They were 36 down and down to 12 men when Matt Pryor got sent off and won it in golden point extra time. They can play.
Yeah.
And when it sticks, they're a really entertaining team. Two more interceptions that were given away probably tells you something about the way Wigan are attacking at the moment, a little bit flat. Without Jai Field.
They're not fluent in attack.
What they have got, and what was probably not made enough of because Leeds were eye-catching in the second half, was how good Bevan French was. Now, he was the best player on the field by a mile, but it's almost like Wigan get to a point where they say, we're coming up against a pretty solid defence, give it to Bevan. It's not enough.
I think as you say, in the first half, for all their dominance, they didn't convert it into sufficient points.
Some of which was down to really committed goal line defence. But no, I just thought it was, as a neutral, you would have watched that and thought, I'd like to see those two teams again next week. And
Great.
guess what?
You
can see those two teams
really
again next week.
Yeah, if that was a game on the BBC, people would have been loving it really from the story of the game, as it were.
Disappointed for Andy, whose time is as good as Zane Tetavano's, because he said, evening, bit late on, sorry, hopefully I've missed a Leeds chat. No. Matty Pete out though, so that's...
ridiculous.
Not at all. I have to say that again, he was so honest and magnanimous in defeat. Played, put the blame fairly and squarely on what his team didn't do in the second half rather than anything else.
If the image of the week wasn't Kevin Sinfield and Roby, it was the return of the Wigan Walk, because always good to see the Wigan Walk on the telly. St Helens beat Salford. Another game of two halves. Again, half time, Weller out. Second half, no, back in. The world champions winning. James Roby.
Salford just made too many really serious mistakes trying to move the ball
in front of their own line.
It's like against a team like St Helens, you are not going to get away with that. It's going to happen maybe once a season, but Paul Rowley must have just got the video and do they have videos anymore? Thrown it in the bin and said, look.
But I think that's the way that teams that have been successful against St Helens have tried to push the ball early and push it wide.
There is a place where...
Yeah, and to be fair, I didn't watch enough of this game to comment. I saw probably more of the first half, and I didn't really see any of the second half. But it was obviously a great turnaround from St Helens in that second half.
And they're starting to get back to what they do best.
They've got Halifax on Friday.
Hope there's a big crowd.
On Viaplay in the Challenge Cup. Halifax fresh off a 60-0 win at home to Whitehaven in the Championship. Battlers, we mentioned earlier, beat Toulouse, obviously a great result for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, like Josh Wood's drop goal.
Bradford back to winning ways, once it's the change of coach, 44-38.
Defence is on top there against us.
I don't know how he scored that many points on that field.
They're all up the middle.
Is that why we couldn't play the international there? Because the pitches are big enough. Get cancelled. Sheffield Eagles won at Keighley, 46-18. Does that mean Sheffield Eagles are the... Anyway. London beat Barrow 30 points to 16.
London York's going to be really interesting in the Cup this week.
3 o'clock kick-off on Sunday, sorry. Can't read. Fev won at Widnes 30-0. York 26, Newcastle 22.
But York,
late drama.
From behind.
Late drama for Andrew Henderson.
I think they were a bit unlucky, Newcastle, there, weren't they?
But is that 3 games in a row that York have won either late on or by a score?
I think they only just beat London at home, didn't they? Yeah.
In League One, which was back.
It's a big game. Probably the game that went under the radar, but actually was really important.
Scholars and Rochdale.
No, well, I was thinking thinking more maybe
No,
Dewsbury, Doncaster, the two unbeaten teams.
Yeah, I listened to a bit of the commentary on Radio
Big
Leeds
win
on
for
that.
Dewsbury.
Yeah, it sounded it was a tight game, 6-4. I listened to the back end of the first half and a bit of the second, and I think they got a penalty try, Dewsbury, and I think that took it away from Doncaster. And I think there was an interesting incident involving Brett Ferris and the ball and the referee. So I've not seen it, but it'll be interesting to see what happens, if anything, from that.
I hope not, because we praised Brett Ferris.
Because
Because he had his 400th game. Was it last week?
As I say, I've not seen it. I was just listening to the commentary, but I think Dewsbury sort of pulled away in that game a little bit from.
But that's
from
a big,
Doncaster.
a big win for Dewsbury.
Yeah, they're two unbeaten sides, weren't they, in the comp? But I think Dewsbury play Oldham away this week, so I think Oldham are in third.
they are.
So it'll be a test for Dewsbury, won't it? As in who they played last week and who they played this week to where they are in the comp.
People who know far more than I say Liam Finn is one of these young coaches who some clubs should be looking at as their future coach, depending on what division they're in.
Yeah, it's only the start of his coaching career. And
we jump on the bandwagon straight away.
He's made a great start.
Good pedigree. Hunslet beat Cornwall 54-10.
Again, that was that close up to half time as well?
12-10, yeah.
Yeah, Hunslet running away with it in the second.
I'm tempted to go to the reverse fixture with that because I can get to Hunslet easy enough, so I might go to that. Just get some Cornwall content on the channel.
Why not?
And pretend they're Ottawa. 28-18 for Oldham at Workington. And yeah, as mentioned,
Which again, did Oldham come from behind in that one as well?
Yes, 12-10.
So, first half of League One games are really worth watching.
Get them on the telly. London Scholars 24, Rochdale Hornets 28. The Hornets ruining London's chance of a first win of the season. This week in League One, Doncaster versus the Scholars, Hunslet Workington, Midlands North Wales, Oldham Dewsbury, Rochdale Cornwall, all this Sunday.
A word for Doncaster as well, that I think they're now trying to put games on before their home matches to re-engage with the community on the back of the World Cup, and Bentley are taking their home game. Is it in the? I can't remember if it's the Yorkshire competition or the NCL, but they are the curtain raisers to that Doncaster game. And it's
in the National Conference League.
And it's great, isn't it? The community clubs get the chance to play in, and I think they had some Masters games on before and an under-13s game.
And York this last weekend had.
Inclusion.
An inclusive day.
I think they took it too far by having a rugby union game. I mean, come on.
Well, there are no.
We don't need to include rugby union.
No, there are no LGBT rugby league teams. But York Templars rugby union LGBT team in York versus Newcastle Ravens.
Brilliant.
And then they had a wheelchair sort of exhibition, I think, didn't they? And then the first team fixture. That's when we're talking about
the AMG model.
Yeah, but we're talking about events and days out. That's exactly what it should be. And hopefully, if people got into the ground, they could go out and get back in. I'm hoping, because if you're at York, you've got that ability to, if it's a family day out and somebody doesn't want to spend all day watching rugby league, somebody can go swimming in the swimming pool, or they can go shopping or whatever.
Coffee shops.
Yeah,
The library.
The library. Can never have enough books.
Up the Roosters, because they beat Warrington 108-24 in the Super League, Wheelchair Super League on Saturday.
Got a couple of new teams. Bedford had their first training session. I think, was it Rochdale as well? So Wheelchair is starting to gain momentum.
Is it the first round, the qualifiers for the women's night? I don't really know how to describe it. Yes. But all the teams we expect went through.
Yes.
Warrington with 3 wins in their group, York, St Helens, Leeds and Wigan. Then we joined by a mystery team.
Leeds pushed all the way by Cardiff.
Yeah,
which is
hopefully
great
they're
to
the
see.
mystery team.
Yeah, they deserve
to.
Was that Leeds without Georgia Hale?
Yeah, what's it all about? What is it?
Got a very good offer from Gold Coast and took it.
June 24th, the final stay at the AJ Bell Stadium. Everyone turn up and make it a bigger crowd than Sailgate. That's all. I don't know why some teams were in the Nunnings and some teams weren't, but to pick another bone with York, when Liv Wood scored, they tweeted "Live Laugh Wood," which is actually quite funny, but also so it's one of these phrases that live, laugh, love. You never heard that phrase?
Straight over my head.
It's chronic. The Challenge Cup round of 6 this week. Halifax St Helens via play 7:45 on Friday. Probably repeated some point during the week, which is what I'll be watching. I hope that Ross off of Viaplay's not picked up any dancers from Eurovision to be doing pre-match.
Again.
Especially that Finland one. They were robbed. I don't think there's any other rugby league to do with the Eurovision Song Contest.
I didn't see a second of it.
Big fan of Ross.
Came on. I loved it.
Hull KR Batley, Wakefield.
I'm looking
League.
forward to that actually because again, Batley with nothing to lose. Hull KR have put everything into where they are at the moment, and actually they might be a good outside bet for maybe a Challenge Cup run, but Batley will test them.
I'm thinking about, I think I'm going to Batley to win the cup because they're not going to get relegated. They're Beaumont go, so it all adds up. Saturday, Catalans Warrington as mentioned on the BBC, Leeds versus Wigan, and on Viaplay, Salford versus Huddersfield.
I think they're heading for at least a 16,000 crowd at Headingley, and I think it'll look great on the telly. The two clubs with the best Challenge Cup records in terms of number of wins, a lot of history. If BBC want to put some footage out, there's plenty of Leeds, Wigan.
I reckon that Martin of Fire tried from
Do you think that will
1994.
be on?
It might just
I think
get
it may
played.
open the programme. What about Barry McDermott sending off in 1999?
Robbie Hunter-Paul's on the Question of Sport this week. Not Jamie, he's not on this week. He's the most modern player they could
Is he
find.
in your seat?
I don't know. No idea.
On Sunday, Castleford versus Hull in the Lee Radford derby, and York versus London in the Andrew Henderson derby. He was also at Castleford as well.
Castleford Hull will be really interesting. Really interesting.
Two teams with... see, I think Wakefield, and I'm not going to say Wakefield are going to throw it in against Lee, but I don't think they can't win anyway, so it doesn't matter. But Castleford have to go strong in that game because they can't afford to lose the fans even further.
Whereas again, a whole
Whereas
team,
Wakefield, we're all just
that are regenerating.
Yeah.
You know, cup might have come at the right time. Yeah.
And with York playing London, there's one championship team guaranteed in the next round. So if you can get through this round and get lucky with drawing York or London, you'd fancy your chances.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're one game away then from Wembley, aren't you?
What if they?
And we all know that there's no form in the semi-final.
What if they win? Do they have to forfeit the 1895 Cup if they get to the Challenge
I
Cup?
don't think anybody's thought about that.
When did the schoolboys game go from 12 minutes aside to 80 minutes anyway? Because that seems to have changed.
Presume that's kicking off about 7 o'clock
I know.
at Wembley in the morning.
Just a random question. That's it, I think, isn't it? That's it. We've got a bank holiday next week.
Really? There's a Monday in May that
I know.
there isn't a bank holiday.
Yeah, the Monday after is.
So that's it. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the week. Thanks, James. Phil, the magazine's out.
It is.
Buy it. It's there.
Good holiday read. Good bank holiday read.
Yeah, and there's another one coming up.
So we'll see you next
And
week.
don't forget Martin Kellner's
Oh, Martin
book
Kellner's book as well. It's there. From All Good Bookshop. Some signed copies available downstairs.
One or two.
One or two. Any other books out?
Well, there are other books.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've mentioned it, but Kevin Sinfield's got a book coming out.
Is he off to Leeds to sign it?
I think there is a signing before the St Helens game. If you're going, club shop.
I didn't know if it had been officially announced or not. I don't know if
No.
Go and meet Kevin Sinfield.